an important topic. Some of us participating today have been following the conflict and the development in Afghanistan for a long time. Some of us are beginners, so please, there are no stupid or silly questions. If you have questions to the panel, you can write them in the chat, and my colleagues Beg Mohammed and Enayat will make sure they reach the panel. As you maybe are aware of, recently digital events have been hijacked by spam bots and the like in the commentary fields, in the chat boxes. So we have disabled the chat function, but that's not because we don't want you to ask questions. We just want to make sure that your questions get the relevant time and place. So after more than 40 decades of conflict in Afghanistan, the country is on course to begin negotiating a peace deal. With a fragile democratic government, an increase in violence, and a decline in international military presence, several are asking if the peace process can guarantee protection of women's rights in Afghanistan. Today, on International Women's Day, Swedish Committee for Afghanistan is very proud and honored to have 4 very, very distinguished and knowledgeable guests with us here today. There are several important questions to discuss when it comes to women's situation in Afghanistan and the peace process. Are women involved enough in the peace talks? Are women fairly represented? Are there any signals from Doha? What do we think of the government's view? What do we believe the Taliban can agree on?
Text.
Thank you, Enayat. Your mic is on. Thank you, Enayat. Are there any demands from the Afghan civil society? And what can we do, participants in this seminar, if we want to do something for women's rights in Afghanistan? So these questions and hopefully several more will be discussed by us here today. Together with us, we have Mr. Isak Svensson. You are a professor and project leader at Uppsala University. You've been studying resolving jihadi conflicts, and I know you also in particular have looked on the situation in Afghanistan, so warm welcome. We also have Ms. Sonja Ahmadi, research advisor at the Norwegian University of Science and also an Afghan women's rights activist. A warm welcome to you too. And we have Mr. Eldridge Adolfo. You work at the Folke Bernadotte Academy as a senior dialogue and peace mediation advisor. I've heard you follow the peace talks in Doha, perhaps on site. So we're eager to hear more on that as well. And I believe we also have Mrs. Rahela Siddiqui with us. I can see you participating. Warm welcome. Rahela is the founder of the Farkhunda Trust, which is a charity supporting education for Afghan women. But Sonja, I would start to ask you and invite you to comment on how do you regard the possibilities for Afghan women to influence the peace negotiations? Yeah, now we can hear you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I want to wish you all a happy International Women's Day, to show respect to all those women who used and sacrificed their lives for political change, gender equality, and to better women's lives. The journey still continues. A lot has been achieved, but there is a lot more to be achieved. I would like to, regarding your question, I would like to say that Afghanistan, women in Afghanistan make up to 50% of the Afghanistan's population. So their voice do matter. And I have to say that today's women, today's Afghan women are very different from women in 1996 when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. Today's women are more aware of their rights, and they know that what price they have paid when they didn't stand for their rights, or if they don't stand for their rights. They're united. They're, as I can see it from my perspective, they are more organized. So when we talk about their voice and their influence, the first thing that I would like to mention is that although women in Afghanistan were deprived of their basic rights, such as rights to education, right to work, the opportunity to expand their knowledge, their competence, and their experiences. Today, we have resourceful women who are working shoulder by shoulder with their male counterparts, both in the negotiating team, on the negotiating table, and women who are working to make the peace process more inclusive, such as female journalists, women human rights defenders, and women civil society activists. So they are making a huge impact. We should not undermine the work that's being done today. They are making a huge impact. They are influencing the peace talks. Their voices do matter. They are much stronger, I have to say, than their male counterparts, because they had all the opportunities. They had the right to education, they had the right to work and to gain experience, but women didn't have it. But today they are doing so much for their future. And of course, how we can make this influence and this impact greater, and how we can make the voice of Afghan women more louder. In that regard, I would like to say that there are so many areas of development. There is so much that we as civil society activists and the international community can do. For example, we can work much more in a systematic way. The flow of information between the civil society, Afghan civil society, and women in rural areas, urban areas, and the Afghan diaspora should be more transparent, and there should be more flow of information, so that all women in all groups, whether they are living in the provinces and have access to education or not, women who are living in the large cities, women who are outside, they feel that their voices are being echoed and that they are being included in this process. And I really like to call this like not to focus so much on the peace talks, but the peace process, because process is a bit much more comprehensive. You know, talks, it's like there are two parts that are engaged in the talks, and they might agree or they might not agree. They might sign a deal, they might not agree and sign a deal. But even if they agree and they sign a deal, the problems of Afghanistan will not just disappear. You see, so the process of building peace and keeping the peace is a long, long process, and this is a work that will need a lot of effort, a lot of sacrifice, and that's why we need to work and get more organized and more united.
Thank you, Sonia. I believe, Eldridge, you would agree with Sonia that it's not just about the peace talks, it's about the peace process. I'm just guessing here, but I believe you would agree. But could you perhaps also share your thoughts on the peace process or the peace talks? I understand you've been following them quite closely from Doha. What are the prospects for a successful peace deal? What's your process?
Thank you, Anna, and thanks everybody for having me available today. But I also just want to say very quickly hello to very good friends and colleagues, Raila Jan and Sonia. Very good to see you. Yeah? And of course, Isaac, who's also a very good colleague. Yes, I agree with Sonia in that the process is important. It's not just the actual talks at the table. Now, the question you ask in terms of what are the prospects of peace, it's a difficult question to answer in the sense that we're also at the beginning of some of these talks. So it will take a bit of time before you actually come to any sort of resolution. There's also been a waiting game to some extent, where everybody was trying to see what the US position was going to be, the Biden position now, as it's changed, and what that would mean. But I think it's become quite clear now what that position is. And so the question is, how do the parties take that forward? I think the biggest issue you may have is that there's an expectation or an anticipation that after 2 weeks, an agreement should be reached. That is impossible. You know, we have a 42-year war that's been going on. There are many things that need to be discussed, many things that need to be resolved. The question of women, their role needs to be more in this process as well. Their issues. And there is an expectation, and I see that people want to have something done within 2 or 3 weeks. If you have that, it's not going to actually last. It's not going to be sustainable. So you need to give the parties a bit more time. The parties have got real issues. It's not, they haven't been fighting for this long for Mickey issues. They are real issues, and they need to be resolved. But these need to also be resolved in conjunction with the people of Afghanistan. It shouldn't only be the party sitting in Doha today. There must be mechanisms in place to help the Afghan society participate in these negotiations. I think the Afghan mechanism for inclusive peace, AMIP, which Mrs. Raila Jan is one of the board members, steering committee members, is one of those mechanisms that's we will work on that, to be able to bring the voices of Afghan people, Afghan society to the table in a structured way so that it's not, it doesn't become messy, because you can't have everybody at the table. Yeah, you can only have a limited amount of people. So the prospects for peace would increase with the parties given a bit of time, a bit of space to try and deal with these issues, but also to include a lot of Afghan civil society, Afghan society in these negotiations. But there is a lot of pressure to have a resolution now, and that's going to be a challenge going forward.
And in your view, has there already begun to be some sort of compromising in the talks when it comes to women's rights, or is it even too early to answer that question?
That hasn't. I can say right now categorically that's not yet on the table.
No.
We're far from that. I think what was agreed was the principles and procedures, and now they may be looking at some agenda points. And those agenda points, of course, women's issues could be one of them, but the actual substance has not yet begun, the substantive negotiations.
So on a positive note, those of us who are committed to contributing to change, we still have time to influence and try to talk to our decision makers and so on.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we have time, but I would say that we need to talk to our decision makers anyway.
Yeah.
Because we never know how it's going to go, but the sooner we can speak to the decision makers, the better. Because, yeah, they need to be supported.
Thank you, Eldridge. Rahela, welcome to the seminar. We started a bit before you joined, but please feel warm welcome as well. You started an organization called the Farkhunda Trust. I'm not sure everyone here in the webinar knows who Farkhunda was. So perhaps you could start off by telling us shortly who the story, and of course, your views on safeguarding women's rights in the coming peace talks and the peace process.
Shortly, I think the Farkhunda Trust is established based on the history of several women who faced violence, including Farkhunda. And we are actually on the positive note. We try to change the story of those violence to see that if women gets education, and we are providing education for higher education for the disadvantaged and talented girls in rural area of Afghanistan and those who lives in poverty. So that's what we are trying, and we are with 19 scholars is going to be graduated, and another 16 will be recruited next year to follow 4 years of their studies. Anyway, in terms of, I must say I'm worried, honestly. And when I'm speaking with you, we just had a meeting with a large group of women, and there are so many worries at the moment. And that's why I don't want to start from where, but as Eldridge said, just to echo his point, that Afghanistan citizens do not need rush and do not need the collapse. And we have achieved a lot in these last 2 decades that we do not want it to see that it puts under soil and all the achievement of the women's and the people of Afghanistan is lost. We know that we already have poverty in the country. 3.7 million girls are out of children are out of school at the moment, and 60% of them, and another statistics say 75% of them are out of school. There are so many other achievements. We have 6,000 of judge, we have 4,000 of army women, we have 3,000 of police, and likewise 1,700 of the private sectors, female private sectors, and so on. So all these are achievements. 600 charities, proactive female-led charities in Afghanistan. Beside that, there are so many others achievement in the countries that we are worried that it will be lost, because citizen voice is not on the table of the negotiation. As Eldridge said, that needs really mechanism, and the mechanism that I'm also the member of the Syrian committee there. That inclusive mechanism needs to be really supported, because it has to bring the voice of the citizen from the ground, from different areas, including the diaspora community on the table, and that has to be heard. And my only hope is also from the European community, that they have to really see that we are not losing in this process. What I see the issue is, I don't still believe that if the Taliban will stand on their promises, where the statistics and information from the field arrives that there are people who are suffering. And if it is not going to be said in the publications and so on, but that is the people of Afghanistan, that they know that this circumstances, these situations need to be changed. But we have more worried that there will be more drastic problems in the country, and there will be killing of women and so on. So we really need, what I'm trying to say here is really inclusive discussions and not in rush. And Eldridge makes me more worried that in 2 weeks there will be peace negotiation agreement will be signed. And this is like 31 million of Afghan people are going to be just with the blind eye to their life and to their human rights, and without their really voice on the table, the agreement is going to be signed. Let alone that if the representative of the US, Dr. Seb Khalilzad, is going to Afghanistan, meeting the political parties, yes, but why not 15 million population of Afghanistan who are women, and they are part of this population, and they can contribute to the process of development in Afghanistan and not be included in any discussions. Only 3 women, if they have been called, and they were advocating that why not consulting with women. Okay, we will meet with the women, but there's no discussions with the women. There's a lot of hope from the very educated and technocrat people who are around these political tables to really see the right of the woman in the country. But we are actually disappointed at the moment, honestly.
Thank you, Rahela, for important information, and I believe feedback to several of those who follow our seminar today. It's important to keep up the pressure and
Can I give you one?
And be realistic. Yeah, sure.
Can I give you one example?
Yeah.
In one of the provinces called Samangan, in one of the districts, I mean, when I say women are already suffering a lot, women who were pregnant and went 2 hours on the donkey for delivery, for the child delivery. And when she arrived, the hospital was closed. That must be because of the insecurity, or not insecurity, must be because of the lack of the resources. And the baby and the mother both are died because of the coldness and because of the bleeding. Yeah. This is one example. And I think there's no tolerance for me to, now from the time is not much that I explained so many of examples of the field that people are suffering from insecurity, from poverty, and we are making here decisions for the populations. But I hope this decision is just and fair to the life of the people of Afghanistan.
Yes, indeed, several tragic examples that reaches us within Swedish Committee as well. So I feel you. Isak Svensson, I'd like to invite you to, you've been studying jihadi conflicts and for quite some years now, and you've studied both Afghanistan, but I'd like to start to ask you, have you seen any sort of involvement of women when it comes to solving jihadi conflicts? What's your analysis on that?
Thank you so much for this seminar and for inviting me to talk on this important theme. I have not focused on Afghanistan in my previous work explicitly, but I worked on jihadist and Islamist armed conflict in more general, and tried to examine the conditions under which these types of conflicts can be resolved. And one of the dilemma that we see in our work is exactly what we are talking about right now. The dilemma between sort of bringing peace, but versus a more sort of quality peace, or a sort of a more justice in a sense, right? And this is a tension that exists and sort of resemble a larger tension that exists in all peacemaking. How should we emphasize sort of just bringing a sort of a closure to an armed conflict, and how should we sort of think about this in terms of trying to address some of the underlying tensions that exist and that actually give rise to the conflict from the very beginning. And we will talk about gender issues. That is very, very important, of course, because inequalities and gender roles are one of the driving factors for these types of conflicts to start from the beginning. And not only if we talk about Islamist and gender and jihadist conflict, but armed conflict overall. Gender inequality is an important cause of armed conflict. And in order for us to resolve these conflicts in the long term, we also have to address gender issues and try to get the fundamental transformation of gender issues. Of course, that's a tall order, right? That's something that is not happening in days, weeks, or even years. That's something that may take generations, right? So patience is very important here. And I think you asked me explicitly about the role of women. I want to emphasize sort of the rationale for including civil society organizations in general and women organizations in particular. And I think there are three important reasons for doing so. And the first one, I think, is the most fundamental, and that's the right perspective. Right, it is a fundamental right to be heard, and in civil society needs to be brought to the table because they are affected of what happened in the conflict, and their voices need to be heard. And I think Afghanistan is a case where this is actually sort of, as we have heard in the previous presentation, this is happening, right? We have a strong civil society in Afghanistan. We have mechanisms in the Doha conversations to try to address this at least. The second reason and rationale is the opportunity. Once an armed conflict is settled, that type of settlement and arrangement that comes of that will have sort of repercussions for many years to come, right? And if the solutions and settlements that are built are not taking sort of gender perspectives into account, we will build into gender inequality for many years to come. So this is an opportunity where these types of constitutions and structures are formed, where it's extremely important to achieve change. And the third rationale is the effects. And here previous research and research on this is starting to show that it actually has a strong effect to bring along. Sorry, I have the sun coming in a very bad direction here. Bringing in not only civil society organizations in general, but women organizations in particular, to bring them on board to the table, and not only nominally to be at the table, but actually to have an active role. And that they can have an effect on the reaching of a deal and the sustainability of that deal. And potentially, although research is not so clear on this point, also the quality of that potential deal that come from there.
Thank you. Three very important arguments and proof of why women should have an active role as well in peace talks and negotiations. I'd like to
Could I say something on that with regards to?
Yes.
I agree with that, and I also agree. I think Sonia also said something to that extent early on. And just to say that in Afghanistan, in Doha, it's not all bad. There are 4 women negotiators that are part of the negotiation team from the Republic side. I think it's Kufi, Giuliani, Dr. Sarabi, and these guys. Very, very competent women as well, very capable women. I've worked with them and spent some time with them. They know what they're doing, and they actually are doing a lot of work in negotiations right now. It's a very tough environment for them, of course. There are no women on the Taliban side, for example, and it's a tough environment as we know how that works. But they are doing stuff. So there are women that are actually trying to make it happen. They're plenipotentiaries. They are part of all the discussions, part of the working groups. They're doing a lot of stuff. But that said, even civil society, women's civil society, has been able to garner itself a lot better. And I will just go back to in November, there was a women's leaders summit, peace summit in Dubai, which was arranged by the Afghan Women's Network, the Women's Coalition, and was facilitated by AMIP, the Afghan Mechanism for Inclusive Peace, which again, the women were able to come up with a declaration, key points. Sonia was one of the people reading that declaration. Mrs. Raila-Jan was one of the people organizing it, if it wasn't her idea originally to have this done. But they came up with a declaration. They've developed an action plan. So there's a lot of stuff that happened. That declaration was also then transferred to the negotiation teams, both parties. They received it. There was a lot of discussion in Doha on the contents of that declaration. So it wasn't just something that was done and fell apart. It was actually part of negotiations in November when it happened. And then more than that, I think AMIP then arranged another meeting where the negotiation team could actually give feedback to the women from the summit. on their declaration and have an exchange, a clear exchange. So those sort of things are taking place. Again, we need to do more of it and more consistently, and that's the whole point. But I just want to point out that the women are actually active, and they are actually pushing really hard to get their voices, and they've been aided and abetted at the table by the women as well.
Yes, thank you. Rahela, go ahead. And after that, I'll ask to see if any of our guests have any questions in the chat. But Rahela, please go ahead.
Yes, I think, as Ildrid said, women civil society, we are, as a coalition, we have actually drafted so many letters, so many panel we had, so many discussions, meeting with the government, meeting with the negotiation team, feeding also to the delegations, especially women delegations, and demanding them that the voice of the people should be on the table. I was actually chairing, as a steering committee member of AMIB, chairing one of the meetings with this negotiation team, and there are so many of activities by the civil societies. But what is so important that if this voice are really heard, and there is a mechanism that each part of the agenda is going to be discussed with the citizens, and transparently citizens are informed, because this is their life and they have to be informed, and they have to be, their voice have to be heard. So this mechanism is so important, that there is no like a hidden agenda between the talking in the dark, the people are in the dark or the citizen are in the dark, and the two team of negotiation, they are, when they are discussing, and there's no information to the citizen. Although we are feeding a lot the citizens, or feeding a lot the civil society organization, the negotiation team, and the negotiation team get our feedback, but how that can be put into the discussions, in the decision making, that is what is very important. And that is where the international community also see their force, that it should really happen. For me, as a woman, and education of women is so critical. Employment is very critical. The rights of having freedom in terms of choosing their career is important. How that will happen and what will happen to their life. That really, there has to be long process. Sustainable peace building is not going to happen overnight, that they are going to sign an agreement. There has to be clear mechanism that what will be the next step, what is the mechanism, and how this mechanism will benefit, and where are the civil societies voice, that they have put several declarations, voices, messages, where are they have been used and being part of the decision-making process. This is very, very important and critical.
Indeed. Thank you, Rahela. Beg Mohammed and Ayatollah, do we have any questions from our audience?
We have one question
Yes, please
from
go ahead.
Ms. Yasmin Posio. What should the international community do to support women in peace negotiations? What do you want me to do as an MP in Sweden?
So I guess the floor is open for anyone in the panel who would like to answer. I guess Sonia and Rahela, what would you like to answer to Yasmin?
I think what I emphasized earlier, it is so important that the just and fair and sustainable peace is in place for the citizen of Afghanistan. That is what we really want, the support of our international community. And that women's right, and the half of the population of Afghanistan, the women, are not become back oppressed of 1990s. This is what we want from the international community. Also post, we have to be very clear what will happen post-conflict, post-agreement. post-peace agreement, what will happen to the life of the women in Afghanistan, people in Afghanistan? We're hearing so much rumors of, and the rumors become reality, because this letter of America, United States, a few weeks before it comes, and it was not official, and now the same is official, that there will be transitional government, there will be this, there will be that, and all of a sudden the civil society is not in the how can I say. So basically, what we really want from the international community is that they see that the peace is just and sustainable and inclusive, and have the voice of the citizens.
Yeah, please, Sonia.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add some points, because as Eldridge said, we were in this Afghan Leaders Peace Summit 2020 in Dubai, and the civil society, Afghan civil society, had some common and shared positions and demands that all Afghan women representatives from the provinces in Afghanistan, Kabul, and the diaspora shared these concerns and demands. We all stand behind that. And I think I would like to name some of those demands. And I think we, as Afghan women and Afghanistan in general, need help from the international community, both in terms of political help, financial and moral help to make some of those demands into reality. For example, in the peace process, peace talks, we need mediators. And for that, we need help. We might need help from the international community, because historically in the peace talks, like in other countries when it has happened, they had both mediators, observers, and a country from the international community who guaranteed that the peace deal, the things that the parts have agreed upon will be implemented in the future, and once the deal was signed. So that's something that's very, very important. But also, as you can see, the Afghan civil society is under tremendous pressure due to the assassination campaign and the targeting killings launched by the Taliban. And despite the danger to their life, they are continuing their work, and just like any other civil society would have done in any other country in a similar situation. So, for example, it's very important at this point that not only the Afghan civil society, the Afghan government, but also the international community put pressure on Taliban for a ceasefire, for just ending the violence against Afghan people. We need protection for our journalists who are being killed. We need protection for our women human rights defenders. You see, so all these are like very important factors that should be taken into consideration. Also, what more? So security training was one of the demands that the civil society had, because once the US troops are reduced, it might happen that the violence increases even more from the Taliban side. That's why Afghan women might need security training that includes both risk mitigation, security planning trainings, and cybersecurity training. Women might need, if the violence increases, they might need safe houses and shelter. And these are things that the international community can contribute to.
Thank you, Sonia. I see Eldridge. Yes, you want to comment, please?
Yes, and not to take away, I think that the two gave very good and powerful points that need to be followed. So please focus on those. I just think, and as we have a member of parliament from Sweden, of course, Sweden isn't directly engaged in the talks, but Sweden can help in terms of the inclusion of women by continuing to push the international bodies that Sweden is part of. So the United Nations, can we continue to push them through there? That insisting on an inclusive process. We do know that the US is trying to ask the UN to come in and play a role, but through the UN, can we ensure that there is inclusion of women? And one of the ways to do that is to ensure that AMIP, which is the Afghan mechanism for inclusive peace, is used to do this transfer for women. And we can give you the details of AMIP if you so wish, but that could be a key, because there you have an organization that's set up by Afghans, is run by Afghans, and is actually trying to make something happen. So don't undercut them. Let them, give them that space to do it. And if you can support them in any which way, through the UN, as I said, but you can support them in other ways. Of course, Sweden as a state can also support. It would be useful.
Just to add one point.
Yes, please.
Just to add one point, I think this AMIB and Afghanistan Inclusive Peace Mechanism, this is so important because we are trying to actually build the network of all the coalitions in the diaspora community as well. Like we have in 14th March, 3 big network in Europe, they are getting together with the AMIB to see that how they can collaborate and how they can contribute as well more effectively. And also, as Eldred said, inside Afghanistan, from the district level to province level, and also by a coalition of different civil societies, organizations, they're all together. I think this mechanism is very, very good. And we were discussing before this meeting, that's why I'm sorry that I was late to this meeting. And there was so much worries. And we say that if we can have like 1,000 women from the provinces that they all come together and reflect on the letters that issued by the United States. This is so important. This is very, very important that there is a voice of women, because they had a lot of worried. And we said, for example, organization like AMIP can help even for the organization and supporting of this big gathering of the women, that their voice really needs to be heard. And as you said, Eldred, inclusiveness of women has a how we can repeat, and too much repeat, that we are 15% of the population of the countries. Today, Afghanistan is not yesterday's Afghanistan. There are so many educated young youth as well, and women, that they wanted to contribute to the process of development of Afghanistan and the post-peace program as well, to contribute. And how we can really see the comprehensive approach of contributing in terms of financial to the, I would say, much more to education and economics.
Thank you. Yes, Isak. Please go ahead.
I just want to build on what all the 3 previous speakers have said. I think this is extremely important points, and I think if we sort of zoom out a little bit, I think the question of sort of commitment is central here, right? And the basic problem is how we can trust the 2 main actors in order to live up to sort of rhetoric that they have, because on the rhetorical level there are at least some commitment to a more sort of gender equal peace and a post-conflict Afghanistan. But of course there are reasons to believe that they may not always be fully honest, right? And also these movements, both of the side are not unified actors. They're different actors within these sides. So even if they speak with one voice at the negotiations in Doha, that doesn't tell us everything about the different actors. So the question that Sonia raised about guarantees and guarantors, I think is absolutely central, and to think about how we can create and sort of structures and mechanisms that actually try to guarantee the enforcement of gender rights in a post-conflict Afghanistan, and also the positive incentives on the other side of the coin, so to say. How can we make the actors, including the Taliban movement, how can we make them see the benefits of peace, right? And how can we see them turning into political actors and becoming politically engaged instead of only armed as armed actors? And both of these sides need to be there, both the sort of the pull and the push factors, in order to maintain this. And the problem is, of course, that in these negotiations, the US has left some of its leverage, and to some extent, of course, this was one of the reasons why the whole process opened up, and that was a positive thing. But on the negative side of that was that it actually left a lot of the leverage that it had, that it could have used to push for this issue, but it did not. So that is a challenge now, of course, because who would be these guarantors that can supply sort of credible guarantees? That's an open question.
What I would see the UN and the European community, that European community and United Nations, they should see as an observer and as a guarantor for this process, and conditions also to the Taliban as to whatever government comes after this peace agreement, that the conditions that if the citizens harm, anything happen to citizens harm, or a women's disclosures, or stopping women's educations, the conditions of the resources to be limited. This could be one, but it has to be really deeply discussed that how this guarantor could be very effective, that really this agreement sustained, because most of the peace agreement, unfortunately, has been failed, 50% of them. And only 16 of the peace agreement, which was sustained a little bit longer, was the signatories were women. So if we say out of 101 or 102 peace agreement in the world, 50% of them were failed. So what kind of guarantor and how this guarantee also could be result to the sustainable peace and just peace for Afghan citizens?
Thank you. Do we have any questions from our audience, Beg Mohammed? We have 10 minutes left, so I don't want to forget our...
Yes, we have one question here that is posed to Isaac. The Taliban-US agreement doesn't mention anything about women's rights and anything about a republic regime. So when liberal democracies such as US don't support such norms and make agreement with a vicious group, how would Afghan women and Afghan government that are weak defend Afghan women's rights?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's not only I should answer, but I can start. And I think, I mean, it is, if we zoom out a little bit, I think it's important to see the history here, right? That the question of gender right came into the conflict, but it came in afterhand. It didn't come in first. When we talk about the US invasion following 9/11, then that was not the first demand that was there. The focus from the US perspective, of course, was on the breaking of the hostship of Al-Qaeda and the connections to Al-Qaeda, and sort of fast forward, and then as a way of motivating and giving a rationale, the question of women's rights was brought in, and that became then an important element. And during after the ousting of the Taliban, this has been one of the great achievements in Afghanistan, and one of the really important developments that needs to be protected. When US withdrew from during the Trump regime, withdrew from Afghanistan, or decided to withdraw, both the Taliban movement and the US had a common interest in the withdrawal. So Trump was very clear and explicit with that he wanted the withdrawal, and he didn't put any particular conditions for the withdrawal in terms of the gender perspective. And of course, this is a difficult matter, of course, because the prolongation of US occupation and external military involvement is problematic, and has been a key driver for continuing this vicious dynamics. And it's been an argument, a forceful argument, that the Taliban have been able to use in their propaganda. So the withdrawal is something that was necessary to some extent, but of course the way it was done also made that enabled, sort of gave away some of the leverage that the US and the international community had. So still there are, of course, possibilities for the international community, because Afghanistan will need to transition to a peaceful stage with collaboration with the outside world, right? And the outside world need to be together with alliance with the local partners in Afghanistan on this issue. And I think an important sort of insights which comes from conflict resolution literature is the idea to be firm but conciliatory. And it's being sort of firm on the underlying interests and understanding what the underlying interests are and put emphasis on that. And in this context, that's about sort of protecting human rights, protecting women's rights in particular, and being firm on those, but still being open for dialogue and conversations.
Sonia, Rahela, or Eldridge, do you also would like to comment? Sonia, you can go first.
Thank you very much. I really do agree with Isak Svensson. You know, this agreement between the Taliban and the United States was not a peace agreement. It was actually a withdrawal agreement. The US had its own personal interests, not the US, but Trump. He had made a promise to the voters once, and in the first term, that he will bring back home all its troops from Afghanistan. And when it was the time for the second term, so he just wanted to fulfill that promise to gain more votes from the voters. That's why he just rushed this process, and it was a very irresponsible thing to do, I think. He gave the United States gave the Taliban the upper hand and put Afghanistan and Afghanistan's government in a very difficult and challenging position. And that's why the Afghan government was also forced to free some of the prisoners who had committed war crimes and had violated human rights and stuff like that. So that was a withdrawal agreement, a very irresponsible one. And to the question, it was actually, the question was formulated in a very interesting way by saying that the United States, which was much more powerful, so how will Afghans and the Afghan government, which is not that powerful or less powerful than them. I think it's our future, it's our life, it's our responsibility. It has always been our responsibility. So we will do whatever we can, but of course, back to the previous question of what we want from the international community, like this time, we really want the international community to have a responsible withdrawal and not to give Taliban the upper hand, because like really they are not fulfilling any of their promises. They are not reducing the violence. The targeted killings and the assassinations have increased. So we really don't know. Like, I believe that it's my personal opinion that they might, what they want is like not peace, it's just reestablishment of power. They want to reestablish their power, they want to gain power, they want to rule again. They have no agenda for Afghan women, they have no agenda for anything good for Afghans. So yeah.
If I could just add one last very quick to all of that and say that I'll be maybe more frank and say it's a real shame that that didn't include, the agreement didn't include these things, because we're not in 1953 or 1833. This is actually 2020 when this agreement was signed. These are standard best practice procedures in all mediation peace building efforts. So this should have been part of it. And it is a real shame that it's not. But having said that, that should not be an excuse for the Afghans, who are a smaller and weaker nation than the US, to not take up the battle anyway. And I think the government has done that, and we should give them a bit of credit for that as well. They have still brought women into their team. They have been asking for issues on the women's table. As I said, we have a lot of meetings have been arranged between women's groups, the diaspora, and those negotiation teams on these issues. So it's also a responsibility of the people of Afghanistan to continue to put pressure on the government to make sure that these issues stay on the table. Nobody's going to do it for you. The states will do what they have to do, but the people of Afghanistan are going to need to keep putting it on the table. That's the only way. You're going to have to fight this one. And smaller powers have beaten bigger powers. And I think that the Taliban will tell you that today, that they managed to beat a big power. So why can't a small nation do that as well?
Some very important words of encouragement there, Aldrich. I see that the time is running out. I just want to see if there is any last reflections or comments that our panelists had prepared that you want to share before we wrap up this seminar.
I just want to say as a last message that
yes.
People of Afghanistan, they are committed and they wanted to save their countries. By all means, they are trying their hard at the large majority. Of course, resources are needed, and it's also international community responsibility that all the investment that they put for the development of Afghanistan is not lost, and it is and living putting Afghanistan in a crisis and war and mess. I think it is in a way make a big question mark for the in terms of point of. I'm sorry that I'm going to be very frank, that human rights practice for me, wherever I am, whatever I am doing, it is in my heart and it is in my practice. And what I would expect, and we would expect from the international community, especially our allies, and my hope is, to be honest, is much more the European community, that if this practice of democracy and if this how can I say this initial steps of democracy that has put in Afghanistan is not lost, and they have to also play their role accountability with accountability as well.
Thank you so much, Rahela, for very wise and strong words as well. I think they serve good to wrap up this seminar. I wish you all, especially Sonja, of course, and Rahela, I wish you the best of luck in your continued efforts and advocacy work. From the perspective of Swedish Committee, we also commit to stay focusing on the rights of women in Afghanistan for as long as we can. And of course, Eldridge and Isaac, thank you and good luck to you too. Thank you so much for taking your time to participate. and thank you to our guests. And I
Thank you.
hope to see you soon again.
Yes. Thank you to Swedish Committee for all their support and services to Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. How can we leave? Okay.